In progress.
The idea of Zichru Toras Moshe Avdi. We were asking about why, when we speak about the Torah of Moshe, do we bring in the idea of Avdi, the idea that he's my servant. Seemingly, when we come to the mile of Moshe Rabbeinu and Torah is about understanding, it's one of our it's not about Bittul and Avdus, and also Moshe Rabbeinu was the main Navi, etc. But why would he bring in the concept Zichru Toras Moshe Avdi? And this has to do with what we were talking about earlier in the Maimer, that there's the level of Zikorin, that it has to be Zachar Amolik. Zachar has to do with the level of Chachma. Dafke through the level of Moyach HaChachma, which is also the level of Moshe. That's how it's possible to overcome the Shikha and to overcome when Amalek wants to cut off the connection with Torah, etc., etc. So we're continuing now in the answer to that question, line 18. But the idea behind this is so that it should be able to be the idea of the Torah of Moshe, like we mentioned earlier. Why is it called Toras Moshe? Because Moshe Rabbeinu gave up his life for it, and therefore the Torah was called, instead of Toras Hashem, it's called Torasoi. So to be able to reach that, for it to be able to be Toras Moshe, there has to be the idea of bittul. So in Yomishal Eved, the idea of bittul is indicated by the term of Eved, that Moshe Rabbeinu is called an Eved, Moshe Avdi, Moshe my servant, She'ein Metzias La'atzmi Klal, and the entire idea of an Eved is not a separate existence whatsoever. The entire being of the servant is the being of the master. For example, anything that the servant acquires is automatically the master acquires. Because he is not an independent being, he could be the ultimate elevation and height of Torah, because since Torah and Hashem are entirely one, and just like Hashem is Menusa, Meroimim is exalted and high and so on, so the Torah is completely high. And this is because that Moshe Rabbeinu is an Eved, so he can have that incorporated in himself as well. Similar to what we find about Rab Shimon ben Yochai, that he was a spark of Moshe Rabbeinu. She'amar, they said, Ano Simona ba'alma. All I am is just a sign for Hashem. The very fact that he says that he's a sign for Hashem, that shows on a very elevated state. Like the students of the Rashbi were saying, who is the face of the master Avaya? That's Rab Shimon ben Yochai. Again, the ultimate level of exaltedness that they're identifying Rab Shimon ben Yochai with Avaya. But in truth, it's not a chas v'sholom, a lack of bittul, but this is actually an indication of his ultimate state of bittul. Because he was completely nullified, he was not an independent existence, rather the godliness that's in him. Therefore he said, I am a sign, because a sign on the one hand shows that it is completely connected to that very high thing that it's a sign of, but on the other hand saying, I'm nothing, I'm just a sign. This bittul of the Rashbi, that he was not a Metzias for himself, that's the bittul of Chachma. And as we know, Chachma is about bittul. Let's explain in Tanya Ba'agah. in the note in the Haggadah, top of page test of Perek Lamed Zayin. So it's Perek Lamed Hey. I'm sorry. Be'inyan islapshus oirin sof besfiras hachachma, about why and how the infinite light of Hashem becomes enclosed in the sphere of Chachma more so than any other the spheres. So the Alter Rebbe says in the Haggadah in Perek Lamed Hey, Shemati min Moira al Bashalom v'chulu. I heard from my master, my teacher, al Bashalom. In other words, he heard, the Alter Rebbe heard from the Mezritcher Magid, She'ein Seif Baruch Hu Echad HaEmes Shehu Levadehu Ve'ein Zolasai. The Ein Sof is the one that is true, and there's nothing besides him, and he is the only one, there's nothing besides him. V'zui Madreges HaChachma V'cholu. Chachma appreciates and manifests that complete bittul, that there's nothing besides Hashem, whereas all the other levels beneath Chachma indicate themselves as being also godly existences, but they're also something. So mitzad goydel bittul de Moshe Avdi, because the great bittul of Moshe, my servant, specifically the idea of servant, which shows on bittul, in the Torah, she Torah Sakadosh Baruch Hu Nikras Torah Moshe, the Torah, which is the Torah of Hashem, is called Moshe Rabbeinu's Torah. The Hainu Hach, they're the same thing, because he's completely identifying with Hashem. The Rebbe now extends it and has it include us as well in a similar vein, has to be and could be and has to be by every single Yid. And the Rebbe gives an example from something else that we find a similar idea. It might be a Yid, for example, concerning awe of Hashem shall zen them, are concerning this, it says, that what does Hashem ask from you? Only to fear Him. And the Chazal asked this, how can this be? This is all, like it's a minor thing. Otu Yira Milsa Zutrasihi, is then Yira a minor thing? So the Gemara answers in the Gaba Moshe Milsa Zutrasihi. For Moshe, it's a minor thing. But the question is, what does it have to do with us? The Torah is speaking to us, not just to Moshe Rabbeinu, but because the Alter Rebbe says that there's the Moshe in every single Yid. So here the Rebbe is going on with that, line 10. Yid is considered a minor thing because of the Moshe in every single Yid. So therefore, this bittul that we're saying, the bittul of Madreges HaChachma, the bittul of Moshe Avdi, to the extent that the Torah is called Torah's Moshe, this is shaykh to every single Yid as well. Zichru Torah's Moshe Avdi. That's why we are commanded that we have to remember the Torah of Moshe, my servant. Through Torah study in a way that's in the ultimate state of bittul. That's the idea of Moshe, my servant specifically, not Moshe Rabbeinu, not Moshe Nevi. So then the study is in a way of remembrance, beyond the changes of times, because the idea of times and changing of times is only in Seder Ishtalshlus, and this is connected with Hashem Himself. Oisei, line 16. This is what it says. Remember what Amalek did to you. So instead of learning it in a simple sense, remember what Amalek did to you. He says no. Remember, meaning use the power of memory, the power of Chochmah, which is the power of Zikaron. Use the Torah's Moshe Avdi. And then the Torah study will be in a manner of remembrance, beyond the changes of time, because that's also the idea of memory. Memory means I didn't forget. It's what I knew then, I know now. And how does he have the level of beyond the changes of time? Through studying Torah in a way of the bittul of a servant, Moshe, my servant. because from the perspective, because of if it's only a level of comprehension without the bittul accompanying it, cholum yesh bakum l'shinuyim, there's room for changes. Shezeu inyan rafu yedayim v'cholu, it says that they left refidim. Refidim means that they were rafu yedayim b'divrei Torah. That means that they softened. There was changes. It was not solid. Until they reached a Satan situation that he met you in the way and he cooled you off in the way. And as a result of this, he attacked all the stragglers amongst you. There has to initially be the avoid in a way that there should not be any approach of Amalek, because Amalek is the first of the nations, the beginning of all the nations. That's why it's called the beginning of all goyim, Amalek, because it's the beginning for all untoward things. Top of page U, the last page. Bebchinas poiter mayim reishis modin. It says that the beginning of a argument is like opening up a little hole in a trough of water, that the water goes out of it. And the more the water is pushing at the hole widens further and further. And that's also the way of argument and disagreement works, that it begins the whole process of everything else negative. So this is the same idea of Amalek is the beginning that begins everything else. And how do we avoid Amalek? How do we prevent Amalek from starting his trouble? This happens through the bittul. Through that he becomes one with Hashem. That's beyond changes, because the bittul elevates him to that level. Through that becomes the war of Hashem and Amalek from generation to generation, including also the generation of Mashiach, that's going to be the final battle with Amalek. Both concerning the Amalek within every single Yid, and also concerning the literal nation of Amalek, until we affect the idea of you shall erase. And when Yidden do their part, that you will erase, that the Yidden will erase Amalek, then Hashem also does his part, and he says, I will surely erase a Zecher Amalek, any memory of Amalek, the Bias Mashiach Tzedkeinu, in the coming of Mashiach, and be for Havaya the rain.